Welcome to our spring season. This is Dr. Ralph Smith, and this is Life's Journeys. One of the things that we tried to accomplish last year was to bring up subjects for Life Journeys that everyone in our audience can relate to. And we've talked about substance abuse, we've talked about anger management, we've talked about raising children, and it's what we'll continue to do as we have our new spring season. And generally we break our business up here into 2 different seasons. So each season is about 8 to 10 episodes, so you can never hopefully get bored of watching Life Journey. But this particular episode is very important to us. And we're talking about senior wellness. And sooner or later you may be impacted with either aging brothers or sisters or parents who will need your help. And it's kind of an awkward situation to be in because they're still your parents, let's say, which means that they're the boss. Well, you're taking care of them. So this is the type of thing you do when you were younger and your parents tried to convince you to do things that was your idea. Well, now the tables are reversed and you get the opportunity. But I want to share with you a very personal example of why this is very important. As you know, my family will cringe when they watch shows because I mention my family a lot, especially my bride Linda. But I want to give you a personal experience to really hit home with you on why it's so important to be there for your parents or your aging brothers or sisters, cousins, whatever the case might be, and how you've got to extend that help even if they don't want it, and perhaps even more important, that they don't ask for it. Back in the summer of 2015, I had put in a rather busy day working over in the Seattle area, went up to a bunch of cities in central Washington. It was very hot, obviously, that summer, and I felt worn out, but I just thought, well, you know, it's typical. I'm not a young man anymore, and my help that was supposed to show up didn't show up, so I kind of had to do these projects all by myself. So by the time I dragged myself into Port Angeles, Washington, to my home in Port Angeles, it was around 10:30 at night, and I was very tired. And I noticed that I had one problem that cropped up, is that when I tried to park my vehicle in front of my house, I had to do it in 2 attempts, which again seemed unusual to me because it's really not parallel parking, it's just straight parking. But I had to do it twice, and I thought, well, that's probably due to me just being tired because it had been an extremely long day with temperatures over in central Washington above 100 degrees. Well, lo and behold, I started going up, and of course Kimber the cat, my cat was there guarding the door, so she quickly ran in. And then when I opened the door, I was having difficulty holding my keys. That was warning number 2. So then after I went ahead and opened the door, got Kimber fed, and got her all taken care of, then the 3rd step was I just jumped in my pajamas and I thought, well, you know, even though I had lunch on the road, dinner on the road, excuse me, I want to just grab a nice cup of soup, just to relax and take it easy. So I made the cup of soup, I got in my favorite recliner, and then I was ready to sit down and watch a little bit of television, and then I went to lift that soup up, and it seemed like it felt very heavy. And I thought to myself, what in the heck is going on? And then I went to get my non-leaded Dr. Pepper. I say that for the benefit of my family members who are watching, who kind of give me a hard time when I drink leaded beverages, as in beverages with sugar. And it seemed heavy, and I thought, what in the heck is going on? Well, at that point, my bride called me. She was back in Chicago, and I was explaining to Linda some of the things I was having trouble with, and she says, are you sure you're okay? Are you flushed? Is there anything wrong? And I said, well, Linda, remember, I'm a doctor. I know if there was anything wrong with me, and I'm fine. And she said, well, what do you mean fine? Your voice is kind of slurred. And I go, well, gee, I don't know what's going on. And then I told her about what was happening. And she said, that's your left arm? And I go, yeah. She says, you know, Ralph, you may be having a stroke or a heart attack. I think you need to call 911. And I said, no, the door is locked. I don't want to let the cat outside because if she runs away, I'll be worried about it. I'm just fine. It's just being tired. And she says, I'm not kidding, Ralph. It could be something serious. So I said, well, I'll prove that. And I went to reach for my Dr. Pepper, and I couldn't lift it up. Now this is a 12-ounce can of Dr. Pepper. It must have felt like it weighed 20, 30 pounds. And my soup, I wasn't even going to attempt to do that because I didn't want to spill all over myself. And I said to her, I said, Lynn, I think I'm in trouble. She said, well, you call 911 right now. And I said, okay. So I hung up from her, and I'm dialing 911, and I can't tell you that I was in any pain, but I just didn't feel right. Well, come to find out, they're ready to send the police department, fire department out, and a police guard, because they know me fairly well in Port Angeles, and all these people. And I remember telling this dispatcher, I said, please, when you come in the neighborhood, this is an older neighborhood, don't come in with the ambulance or any of the lights going or the siren, just come in quietly. And if you folks feel you need to take me off, I'll yield to you. And they said, that's fine, Dr. Ralph, but they're on their way. And of course, in the background noise, I could hear the damn sirens on. And I thought, oh boy, every neighbor is going to come out in my neighborhood, and what's the matter, what's going on? They knocked on the door, and they said, Dr. Smith, would you please open the door? I said, sure. And when I went to go to the door, I could not get up. I literally lost the use of my entire left side. And there's a couple of episodes that occurred during that, but since this is semi-family television, I won't tell you what happened. But I found myself dragging myself, and at that time I weighed over 300 pounds. And I just couldn't get the door open. And they said, Dr. Ralph, please back off, we're going to knock the door down. I said, no, you're not going to knock the door down. I can get to the deadbolt. And it was almost like that deadbolt was in heaven. I couldn't hardly reach it. But I gave it one final try, I got it, and I said, for God's sake, please make sure you don't let my cat out. And they got to me, and all of a sudden I just remember just the color of whiteness. That's all I can remember, being flooded in white lights. And I could hear in the background people saying, how are we going to get him out of here? We don't have the fire truck with us that has the hoist. And I remember laughing to myself, even though I wasn't showing a reaction, because I thought, why would they need to use a hoist to get me out of this house? I mean, I got a porch and 4 steps. Well, I was thinking this to myself. Apparently I wasn't conscious, but I was thinking of that. And then all of a sudden I opened my eyes and I could see the gal next door, whose name is Pam, who kind of acts as my caregiver when I get in trouble. And I could not recognize her. And I said, well, who are you? And she says, I'm Pam. Now, the truth be known, and now everybody's going to know the secret, I didn't recognize her because, quite frankly, she didn't have any makeup on. And I'm used to my bride, it doesn't matter whether she has makeup on or not, she looks the same to me. And I said, well, Pam, thank you so much. And then they said to me, I remember them saying, well, Dr. Ralph, we can wait for the fire truck, but we really need to get you in the hospital. We're very worried about you. So can you take just a little bit of pain? Now, I found that a little bit humorous, even though I wasn't making sense to these folks, because I thought, man, talk about pain, I don't know if I'm having a stroke or a heart attack. Let's get me to that hospital right away. So as they brought me down there, my head would hit each of those 3 steps. And of course, no sooner they got me into the, the dolly and got ready to put me in the ambulance, I could remember this. It's kind of like a dream. Then the fire truck shows up, and of course, full sirens. So everybody in the neighborhood started coming out of their houses, and by this time it was almost midnight. And they were able to get me up, and we didn't have to use, quote, the hoist. As I was going to the hospital, the scary thing for me was hearing the sirens and realizing that I could not control myself. And I was scared, I was worried, but I wasn't worried about dying because I'm good with God, and I missed my family and all the people that I helped. But the reality at that point, I was 62 years old and I'd lived a good full life. Well, they got me to the hospital, and then I started passing in and out of consciousness again. And then I heard them say, which people, docs especially need to know this, and I know that I do it when I deal with patients who are either suicidal or facing life at the end of the life cycle, is that they can hear everything. You might not show it, but you can hear everything, and I could hear everything. And so they basically stabilized me, and they apparently lost me nearly twice, but they said, well, we got to get him the MRI right away because of the fact that, and again, these aren't exact words, it's just how I remembered it, because we got to find out where this clot is and if it's still clotting, because his body is starting to shut down. And I remember saying to them, I'm okay, and some really very attractive nurse, so obviously I hadn't lost all my senses, patted me on the shoulder and said, Dr. Ralph, we're going to be okay. We just need you to get in the MRI. And I remember looking at that MRI, it was a closed one, and I said, you're going to get me into that machine? I said, don't you have an open MRI? And then she smiled, she said, let us be the doctor here. You just relax. And she said, it's very important that you lay in that MRI and don't move, because if you move, we got to do this all over again. And we only have one shot at this. And so I tried my best, and they told me it was going to be 20 minutes. Don't kid yourself, it was a lot longer than 20 minutes. There was no family there for me. Pam went back home. It was just me and my good friend MRI. And I could hear that MRI go bang, bang, bang. And I tried hard not to move. I tried to take my mind somewhere else, which I'm trained to do as a psychologist. But then I got scared, and I thought, this may be it. And basically I started praying to my mother, who is, of course, departed, and talking to her and saying, look, I'm sorry, Mom, I couldn't finish my job taking care of Dad, but Lori can do it. Just make room for me, I'm coming your way. And then all of a sudden they took me out of the MRI. People react differently when they're facing death. It's not that I'm a courageous man, it's not that I'm a brave man, but it taught me a lot of lessons that we're going to share with you in this program today. And number one, do not ever make yourself an island. When you need help or you have issues or whatever, ask for help from those people you trust. Spend the time while you have good health building a good friend base. And for God's sake, don't wait too long. Because if I had waited any longer, I wouldn't be doing this program with you. Yes, the hospital stay was brutal. It was almost a week. Yes, they never did find out where the clot was from. It just had been on the right side of my brain and then basically knocked out everything to the left. And yes, I had to learn how to walk and use my left leg and left arm. And unfortunately, and of course my staff thinks it's a great idea, I've lost a lot of my recall. So whatever happened before, except long term, which gives me almost a dementia syndrome, but I have a hard time remembering short-term memories. There's more post-it notes there than dollar bills in my house, and I have put everything in a planner book, and people like Sean, who runs our media divisions, have to constantly remind me that they've already told me this or told me that. I write everything down. I couldn't drive for quite a while. I couldn't ride on the airplane. I almost missed my daughter's wedding, and even now I have difficulty sometimes making it to the airplane and having to make several stops, or we call nature calls. I'm not asking you to feel sorry for me, and I'm not asking you for my help, but I want you to pay close attention to this program, because it's better to have your program of your life and what you're going to do with mom and dad, or again, elderly members, or maybe people aren't even elderly. Maybe they get hit by a stroke when they're young. There's no rule that says that you have to have a stroke when you're in 60s, and that's exactly what I had. But I'll tell you something, it gives you a whole new mission in life, and one of the things that I did, and I sought out Nate, who will share with you some of the secrets and some of the stories he's had in taking care of senior care. We're going to do that today. Then we're going to have a special tribute. And then when we come back for our second episode of the spring season, we're going to bring Nate back and we're going to talk about counseling. And this applies to a lot of people. It's hard for people to ask for help, but it could be the difference between life and death. So stay tuned as we talk about senior wellness and what you can do to help those people that you care so much about. Well, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that break to get something nice and cool to drink, preferably non-alcoholic. And now we're ready to resume our program. First of all, I want to introduce you to Nate Maxwell. I read his story in the local newspaper here, and I know we're broadcasted throughout the Northwest, so I won't plug any newspapers. And what struck me is that all these years of being a doc, and I've been a doctor over 30 years now, I've never had anyone either approach me or read about someone that I wanted to meet that focused on elderly senior care. Now, for those folks who are not familiar with our home network here, PAPA, as we call it, Awake Broadband, Channel 21, is that there's a community called Sequim, Washington. And Sequim, Washington is usually referred to as the Banana Republic because of its positioning right by the big mountain, as we call it, and it shelters it from a lot of rain. In fact, both Port Townsend and Sequim get very little rain. I live personally in Port Angeles, Washington, in addition to my home in Boise, and I'm only 14 miles away from Sequim, and yet I'll get 3 times the rain because we're not protected as much by the shadow. So Sequim is known for an older population. A lot of people have come here and retired. The area in Callum and Jefferson County is well known for a lot of retired military who have either served time at Bremerton or the Coast Guard station in Port Angeles or whatever, and they fall in love with this area. In fact, we call it paradise. So Nate obviously recognized a need. He's got the finely skilled personality, I think, and I mean personality is important in this business, to be able to be a counselor and to relate to seniors. And seniors are sometimes very difficult to earn their respect and, in a sense, their total trust. And respect and trust is all the same thing to those folks. So to have those skills is truly a blessing. So first of all, Nate, I want to welcome you to Life Journeys, and hopefully you'll have frequent appearances on our program. Nate, why don't you tell our audience a little bit about you, what type of things you've gone through in your life, your credentials that you've managed to earn, and why you chose Sequim, Washington as the place to carry out your practice.
Well, originally I was living in North Dakota going to school for my bachelor's program and came out here. My parents retired here about 15 years ago, 16 years ago, and we visited, and my wife and I were seeing, it was at the moment we saw Crescent Lake. We were like, oh my God, this is beautiful. And when we were leaving, we said it would be nice to retire out here, and I said, why not this after we're done with school? So after we both graduated, we moved out here, sold everything, came out here and made the risk, and then started out caregiving in the area, and I saw that obviously there's quite the need for caregivers, and I was only helping one person with that situation. And so I tried to move up to supervision, so I was supervising over caregivers, and I wasn't helping the mental needs. I was getting all the physical needs and make sure they're bathed, clean, and all the housework and all that, and make sure they got good meals, etc. But I was noticing there's quite the need for the depression, and then there's an epidemic of opiate addictions among the elderly, and I wanted to see what I could do to impact that. So that led me taking courses at Argosy in Seattle and got my master's there in counseling.
Very good.
And then after that, I ended up doing case management for senior information systems for a while, and again saw more the need of getting the physical needs met, but not the mental needs. So I decided to open a practice after working at Jefferson Mental Health, now Discovery Behavioral Health.
Right.
I was running an adult day treatment program there called Harbor House, and worked with a variety of clients that were severely mentally ill, schizophrenia and schizoaffective, bipolar, borderline, very difficult people to work with. I enjoyed it, don't get me wrong, but my passion was with the seniors and the elders that needed help in this community where I live, being that job was in Fort Townsend. So that led me to taking the leap into starting my own practice and seeing what I could do for this community at a greater capacity for mental health. Because there is quite the need here, but not too many people that are doing what I do here in this community. So that's what led
Well,
me
very
to-
few, in fact, and I considered it a blessing when I read that article. I read a lot, and in the local newspaper, so we don't plug anything, did quite a story on you, and I've just felt the need to reach out, and I want to thank you for allowing us not only the opportunity to include you in life's journeys, but being able to meet you earlier, and I do appreciate that. You know, we refer to life, and I know that in all your training you've come across this, as the golden circle of life, when we're born naked and come into the world and hopefully get blessed with parents that not only take care of us, but hopefully stay together, although that's getting to be a rarity. Then we go through our growing stages of breaking our independence from the home and going to kindergarten and going to school. And then we go through the wonderful stage called puberty, which some people make it through all right and others don't. And then we go into young adulthood. Then we find that special someone, get into a committed relationship, perhaps add children to the equation while we work on our careers. And then as we begin the, quote, downward slide, I can say that because I'm now a senior, and the downward slide where we turn our kids loose, they're making families, and then we look at mom and dad, if we're blessed enough to be mom and dad together, and be able to say, okay, what's next? And considering that the average male lives approximately 74 years in today's society here in the United States, and 78 years if you're a female, you got a lot of life ahead of you. So if you retire, and you're blessed to retire at 50, 55, and at the worst, maybe 60, 62, or 65, then you have your life to go forward with. And as you know, and we've talked about before, I think one of the most touching songs was from Cat Stevens, Cats in the Cradle or whatever. And boy, does that tell the whole story. And is as true today as it was the day that he did that song, which I was around to hear at one of his concerts. But the reason I asked you this and read a long question, I think that most people out there don't realize the need that seniors need to have communication and interfacing with people. We understand it because we're behavioral professionals, but I think a lot of people don't. And then I think to myself, what do we do in reaching out to those seniors? And whether we're a daughter, a grandson, or whatever the case might be, and how can we continue to interface with them? Because the worst thing is being left alone. And I speak with experience on that myself, as my 3 children are rather busy in life. How do you do that? How do you tap into that? And then how do you educate the seniors and to get their trust? And then finally interface with their family members, do the same thing.
Well, with mental health, there's quite a barrier for that generation when they were at a younger age, that it was considered you were crazy, a mad person if you were going to a counselor. And and now, as the culture's shifting, people are seeing it's like you're getting a tune-up. You're just you don't have to be severely mentally ill to ask and question yourself and see what you can guide yourself to.
And that's why we use the term mental wellness.
Exactly.
I have the same thing, God bless you, because people say, well, Doc, I really don't mind you helping me, but don't tell anybody because they'll think I'm crazy. And then finally I started thinking about it. I thought, okay, and of course we moved out of counseling into education. I thought, we call it mental wellness.
and everybody can relate to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So
Especially the
breaking-
tune-up thing, good point.
Yeah, it is where I started in explaining that to, and I offer oftentimes to meet with the parents and then the kids and see if that would be a more warming up to the situation of getting a tune-up and not being mentally ill as with those stigmas that was attached. So a lot of the time it starts with just a conversation about confidentiality, because that is really the foundation when you're working with a population that feels like they don't want other people to know.
That's
So
right.
confidentiality is where I start, this isn't going anywhere. And if you don't want your family to know, I'm not going to tell them. Of course, there is some rules with that and et cetera, but for the most part, I'm not going to, this is our conversation and we're going to keep it in this room. And that is empowering to them to know that they can share secrets. And that's my job, is to hold secrets for them. And that is a powerful therapeutic tool for especially this generation that is being forgotten. Like you said, we're coming up to this epidemic of people turning, the baby boomers,
Mhm.
moving into retirement age, and we do not have the infrastructure to help. So what is going to be the situation around the corner? Depression, drug abuse, and it's a silent epidemic. These people are drinking still, and then they take the prescriptions, and then they're having falls and accidents, and nobody's talking about why is the reason why are they lonely? Why are they feeling like they need to somehow get away from the reality that is around them? And most of the time it's loneliness and just not being heard. And then there's the physical aspects. They're in the part of their life that the life's taking things from them and not giving anymore. Their mobility, the way they eat sometimes is changed. And then simple tasks of bathing and showering and using the restroom are changed dramatically as you age, and those physical elements start rearing their ugly head. And so that's another conversation, is just making sure that they understand that sucks. And that is a groundwork of, I'm sorry, empathy. And they don't hear that empathetic side. It's like, oh, you're old, go away. And like you said earlier, in the culture of America, we don't want to think about them after they turn 60 and they're no longer working and contributing to society in the way we feel they should, when in fact they have a lot to offer. There's a lot of wisdom there, and other cultures tap into that wisdom. There's a lot of hurdles for them now in this day and age with technology and etc. But that wisdom still is there, and it's a valuable resource for sure.
I share with people when I work with them that because I have a doctor in front of my name, a big DR, that doesn't gain their respect. It doesn't gain their respect, as we say in West Texas. It doesn't gain their trust. It just means that I probably went to school longer than they did. And that in working together with people and earning that, you have to earn it. Having some letters either behind your name or in front of your name don't do that. And the reason why I bring that up, it's also a fact, and there's no one that'll argue this, that mental wellness is not exactly the top priority of our lives. That certainly isn't a top priority in the new Trump administration. It hasn't been the top priority in the Congress for quite a while. It seems a lot of those services are availed if you break the law, and then you're kind of mandated to get those services. And yet to the average Joe and Jill out there who follow the laws, who live the good life, who raise the good family, then unless they happen to have money, and I know that Medicaid and Medicare provide some funding, but not near enough, that they go without.
Mm-hmm.
And I can tell you the absolute 100% truth, that since we did episode 7, which was grief management, I have received more phone calls on grief management than anything I've received on substance abuse, domestic violence, cognitive changes in people, any of that, and because people related to it. And it was mostly the elderly, because they don't realize, a lot of folks out there, that when you lose somebody that you've been with 40 or 50 years and had children with them, had some great times and many sad times. And those sad times, you tend to remember those more than the good times, unfortunately, but that's a whole other show you and I will do down the road. But when that person's pulled out of their lives, and they have kids too busy or too far away to help, and you're sitting in that home or the mobile home or whatever, all by yourself, that would eat up the most healthy person, no matter who you are.
Yeah.
So that very long lead-in is my next question. How do you handle them with guilt and get in grief? Guilt and all the things they wish they'd done in their lives, which I think that's why a lot of younger people avoid it, because they see in their grandparents or their parents, that's where they're headed, and they don't want to look at that. So I think that's why they tend to abstain. Or what do you do as far as telling about grief so that they can move forward in life and realize that, they might have to do this alone until they learn to go to the bingo parlors or whatever.
Yeah. Well,
How do you handle that? Because that has to be something you face all the time.
Yeah. Well, with guilt, it's coming to an acceptance of their life, and like you said, we tend to focus on the negatives. So there's a lot of different processes that you can do through DBT, CBT. Existentialism was really powerful in this situation. It's getting to see that they've done more good than bad. A lot of the time, the way our brain is functioning, it kept us safe to remember bad things.
Right, I think you're right.
Absolutely keeps us out of the trouble. So training the brain to see, having them write, maybe telling their stories of growing up and all the things that they persevered through is a powerful tool. Narrative therapy, telling their story, absolutely gets them geared up and seeing that they did have a successful life. They may not have originally been what they expected. Nobody ever does. Life takes you in absolutely different directions. I never thought I'd live in Sequim, Washington, and here I am, So acceptance, getting them to hear their story and understanding that they did do quite amazing things. You don't live say 80 years and not have done a lot with your life and survived a lot of different things. As for the grief now, that's a personal experience that in American society we've really distanced ourselves. You got the 5 stages of grief that Kubler-Ross brought up, but she never intended it to be for death. It was cancer patients that she was talking about and came up with this. She regretted even writing that. So we have this expectation, okay, it's been a year, let's move on. And that isn't the case for everybody. And giving them the tools to see that grief is a personal experience, your personal perspective, and then it's okay to still cry a year later. It's okay when you see a picture or set a plate for a person that used to do that for 20, 40 years, and they're not there anymore. And that's okay, and there's nothing wrong with you, because that's a lot of you'll hear, well, what's wrong with me? Why can't I move on? Nothing. You're having a regular reaction to a situation that is a sad situation. It's a normal thing, and because we don't talk about it, it feels like it's abnormal, and that's where we start.
And also, I think people tend to be more materialistic. It's not a matter in life of judging your life and your contributions in life based on how much money you have in a checking account, or how nice a car you drive, or how many homes you may own. What you have to do, and it's very hard to do that self-examination, is to measure all the people you've touched. The fact that whatever reason you had children who went on and touched other people, and hopefully for the betterment. And if you want to deal with it in a spiritual sense, it's your good deeds that perhaps give you the gateway to heaven.
And that's
not necessarily what church you go to.
Yeah, and that narrative therapy can help them see that their story is more of an influence in a lot of different people's life than they realize.
And I agree with that, and I think one of the things that our audience would be hopefully happy to hear is that we spend a lot of time in our life dwelling on our, quote, defeats. We're not supposed to say that in the industry you and I are in, but let's say defeats. They spend very little time celebrating their victories. And we call it positive reinforcement, but I always ask people when I give them parenting classes, how many times do you catch kids doing things right? Why is it always that you try to catch kids doing things wrong and punishment? That's why when you say something to a kid and their head drops down, that tells me right away, and I don't have to be a doctor to figure it out, because I've raised 3 kids with my wife Linda. That's already figuring they're expecting the worst. And then you take those children, you put them in adulthood, and it's the same thing when they have that relationship with a boss, or perhaps a future, lover, or whatever the case might be. So that leads to my next area I want to talk about, and we don't have near the time, but we're going to come back and visit this again. A lot of people may be shocked to know, I know you know it, but a lot of people are shocked to know that the second largest group in suicides are the elderly, 65 plus. We have laws of assisted suicide in Oregon, which, by the way, I think is rather a good thing.
In here.
And here too. And I think those are good things, because why have people suffer and have the insurance company spend all that money? We have people that don't understand, you touched briefly on it, the amount of drug addiction involved. You could start off with something as innocent as having a lot of pains, which, believe me, I have more pains at 63 than I had at 43.
Mhm.
And I'm not talking about Sean being in pain, that's a different pain. But the bottom line is, how do you educate them and walk them through that? Because it sounds kind of corny to say this, and I'm not trying to make this a humorous segment, but if you don't believe that, folks, and I'm talking to all you out there, go to Costco and in an older community and see what's mostly in their cart. You're not gonna just find fruit, you're gonna find the alcohol. Now that in Washington in particular, Costco can sell all kind of liquors. All that wine, all those hard liquors and stuff.
Mhm.
There's a reason, that's not an accident.
Yeah.
Unless they're having a party every week, and if they are, I want you to invite me, okay? But the bottom line is, how do you walk them through that? Because that's a tough trust issue, because you're not being critical, but you're in a sense reaching out, as you know this, and this is more for the audience than you, obviously, but reaching out and say, okay, there may be a problem here, but talk to me. Share with me how I can help. But you can't very well accuse them of anything. And then you throw in the legalization of marijuana on top of that, and boy, there's a lot of temptations out there that aren't against the law. How do you handle that?
Well, they're coming from a different generation. They're a cocktail hour generation.
Yes, that's true.
It's a common thing
Good
that
point.
they grew up with, and it was a common thing for every parent to have a liquor cabinet, and they would come home from work and have a cocktail before dinner. That was absolutely the norm. So that shift in alcohol has been recent, and so instead of condemning the use, because this has been their whole life, this is just a common cultural thing from their generation. So I more talk about the risks. Are you willing to break your hip? Are you willing to break your femur because you want to have a cocktail and makes you dizzy and fall? And these are injuries that end you up in a nursing home, and nobody wants to go to a nursing home. So you have
That's a warehouse for the elderly.
Absolutely,
We don't want that.
Oh, some warehouses are better than a nursing home.
Yeah.
So that's the conversation you start with: is how important is your physical health to have that cocktail every day? Is it necessary? And are you only having one? Or if you're having 3 or 4, can you just have the one and do harm reduction?
And how that interfaces with the medicines they're taking.
Exactly.
Which is something they don't think about,
No, they
but it
don't.
does have an effect.
Again-
Lyrica, which is one of the greatest painkillers there is, and I know because I'm on it, it says very clearly, do not, absorb or drink alcohol during the treatment of this drug.
Yeah.
And I take 2 Lyricas because of my type 2.
Yeah.
So, and of course that's unfortunate because I like wine.
Yeah, well,
But I gotta be safe. But I'm thinking of those things. You're obviously gonna think about it. But the average person?
No.
I don't think so.
Because it's part of their culture. Growing up, this was an expectation that that's what you did. With the medications too, it's a magic pill. They come from a generation, again, where the doctor who created, they come from penicillin.
Mhm.
That was a wonder drug, and we've based our entire foundation of all our medications on, ooh, here's a pill, it'll fix everything. And that's another conversation you gotta have. Every one of those medications you're taking have a repercussion. There's going to be physical ailments from that. So if you're going to add alcohol to that, if you're going to add marijuana to it, you're going to have another thing that could cause you physical problems. And not to mention the mental. If you're depressed, if you're going to be depressed and then drink a depressant, alcohol, what are you going to do? You're going to get more depressed.
That's
You're
right.
alone, I'm going to have another cocktail, then have another one, and then you break your hip. You're going to be even more in a rough situation because you're going to be away from your house. You're going to be in a nursing home with staff that aren't, well, I've seen good staff, but
Right.
there's some that have a reputation that aren't that great. And then you're treated less like a human. There's no dignity in that situation. So do you want to be with your stuff, or do you really want to have those 4 cocktails? So that's where you start with those conversations.
In our industry, there's a term I absolutely hate, but it's worked its way in, and that's called self-medication.
Mm-hmm.
You and I both know it's more than that, but that's a convenient term that everybody uses, and it makes a nicer spin on obvious problems. And I think that's one area all of us need to be cognizant of and awareness of, and all those things to be receptive to, because there are a lot of people, and we'll do another show on this also. We're going to keep you busy, by the way. But there's another show that we can do on the demons of alcoholism and the fact that alcoholism can be managed and treated perhaps, but not be replaced. It's incurable. People argue over it, but that's my experience. But again, that's another show. But where am I going with this? I'm going to ask you, Nate, to kind of look in that camera there behind Big Sean, or ahead of Big Sean, and talk to us 40-year-old son or daughter who's got a mom or dad entering those 60s, mid-60s, whatever the case might be, and tell, Sean, in that little camera right there, if you were talking to that 40-year-old and they're worried about their mom and dad, some tips you would give them to help them in that transition.
First off, I would talk about resources. I would ask them, what are their physical needs? Do they need caregivers? Do they need someone coming into their home helping them with basic house cleaning? Do they need help with yard work? Do they need help with basic food, water, and paying and bills? A lot of those things can be managed now with online payments. So the resource guide at Senior Information and Assistance would be a good start. Finding out what resources are available in the community and how you can support your mom or dad. And then going for the next step is what's affordable, and that it's expensive to keep mom and dad at home. It's even more expensive to get mom and dad in a nursing home. So you want to look at the benefits of keeping them in their home is astronomically better for their mental well-being. So do you want to just make them safe in a bubble, basically, in a nursing home? Or do you want them to still experience their freedoms and have mental well-being that you've come to know and appreciate from your parents? So that's where I would start, is resources, and then expand from the physical needs to the mental needs, et cetera, et cetera.
And if they need some help and some guidance, make sure you include your area code, because we're shown all over the Northwest and of course throughout the world on YouTube. Could you give them your phone number and then they can give you a call?
Yeah, they can give me a call at 360-797-4307.
Excellent. Well, as I can speak, I think for you in this regard, we do a lot of these things we do out of the love of helping people. It's certainly not the money. It's certainly not an ego thing. But every time you help somebody and they recover the joy of life, I know it's probably the same for you. It just gives you a spring in your step.
Yeah.
And for me, that's a big thing, getting this body removed.
Yeah.
So Nate, I look forward to your next appearance on our next Life Journey show, and we'll talk more about counseling and some of the things family units can do to live a better and happier life, okay?
All right.
All right, we're going to take a short break, and when we return, I'm going to share with you the game plan. Nate's already given you the nuggets, and please, you can review this program on our website, which is www.jennymwellness.com or papaonline.tv. And you might want to see this program 2 or 3 times and share it with your family members, and perhaps you can come up with a plan to help your parents or your grandparents or whatever the case might be. He's given you a lot of nuggets there, and I'm going to come back after this break with the game plan. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Life's Journey with Dr. Ralph Smith. We enjoyed an excellent visit with Nate Maxwell, and I hope that you'll take advantage of those nuggets that he gave you and the information he shared with you. And once again, feel free to give him a call if you need further guidance. This is a tough show for me to do, but I'll tell you why. And I haven't even shared it with my son here, Sean, and I certainly haven't told Nate. But I lay these shows out way in advance. And by way in advance, it's not that I record them way in advance, but I start thinking about the things that my patients talk about, my friends, my family members, and we try to make Life Journey shows about things that they want to talk about. As I mentioned before, we always make it part of our classes that we teach. This one was done actually about 2 or 3 months ago. I wanted to do it. I read the article. Nate was kind enough to give me an appointment. I was able to talk with him about it. I could tell in the first 15 minutes he was perfect for this role, and I'm so glad of the gifts he's given you. But one thing I hadn't expected, and one thing that's very personal to me, is that Sergeant Chief Engineer William H. Smith, at age 84, passed away yesterday afternoon in Squamish. And yes, he was my father. And I'll tell you something about him. As a kid, it was very hard to grow up because he's very strict and very demanding. And as my Italian mother used to say, and she passed over 18 years ago, that's the German side of the family, Ralphie. So don't let it bother you. And after a while being raised in that environment, I made a couple of decisions. Number one, I would never put that kind of pressure on my love partner, of course, who I've been with for 45 years, Linda, and my 3 children, Sabrina, Kevin, and Hillary. And I would never spank my children, because I used to remember him getting home at 4:30 and waiting in the room for that spanking because I'd misbehaved. And I promised never to spank my children, and I never did. But he also taught me a lot of life lessons. He taught me how important it was to work hard, how to be truthful, how to do the things for the right reason, and not just because they're selfish reasons. And he was a very demanding father. And then when my mother passed away, the day before she passed away, she asked me to do 3 things. She asked me to find happiness in life instead of working so hard. She said she liked to hear me laugh more often, even when she was up in heaven, because I never laughed anymore. And then she gave me the toughest job of all. And yes, you guessed it. She asked me to take care of my dad. Now, I'm sure that she never expected that there would be an 18-year gap between her passing and my father's passing yesterday afternoon. But I do know that I came back twice to do the job. I couldn't do it from Boise, Idaho. I couldn't do it from anywhere else. So I moved to Port Angeles twice. And as he would always say, you can live in Port Angeles, but I don't want you living in Sequim, because I don't want you bothering me. And a few other things we can't even say on public access television. But the bottom line is I did my very best job I could as a son. And then when I was hit with that massive stroke, I found I had to yield that to my sister Lori and getting help to take care of him because I was no longer able to do that. But I can truthfully tell you that I'm at peace with his passing yesterday. He was in a tremendous amount of pain, and he always spent every day talking about missing Mom and why he had to wait 18 years. So now he's up there with her, and boy, I bet he's getting an earful of how tough she was on Ralphie. But he was tough on me for a lot of reasons, and I'm sure in his heart he felt it was the right reason. So I want to dedicate this show to him. And the most important lesson I can give you, besides the wonderful nuggets that Nate just shared with you and my game plan, never take for advantage, never, ever take it for granted that your parents or your kids or anybody's going to be there forever. Because you never realize their loss until they're gone and waiting for your express to heaven. So for those folks out there that are tuned into this program, this is a tribute to Bill Smith, because I'm sure he would appreciate me doing this. He's not going to be happy I mentioned his name, but I won't have to face him until I go to heaven, so I have plenty of time to come up with some excuses. But the bottom line is, be grateful and you're blessed to still have parents you can pick up the phone and call them and get advice or get yelled at. If you still have grandparents, and at my age it's a little hard to have grandparents now, but having grandparents, be blessed, because without the love that came with those grandparents who created your mom or dad, you wouldn't be here. And so you always owe them a debt of gratitude. And hopefully the life lessons you've learned through their wonderful leadership, whether it be grandparents or parents, and I know a lot of grandparents are raising kids nowadays due to some issues in our society, be grateful that they were there for you. And then when you get the most important job in the world of being a parent, pass that love and that kindness and those skills onto your children. Because guess what? They pass them on to theirs. On behalf of Sean Bennett, who runs the whole show here on Northwest Media, and of course certainly our friends at Papa, who are our home network, and everyone else that makes this program a possibility and a reality, we thank you. And we'll visit you again soon, and we'll talk a little bit more about counseling and how you can live even a better life. Take care of one another, and God bless.